Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review World War Z. Going into this movie, it's kind of interesting because you don't get this kind of zombie invasion. You don't get it very often. Very rarely do you see huge, widespread zombie kind of things like this. Uh, every, like, for certain examples, you might be able to see Train to Busan eventually kind of pull this off. You might see a Dawn of the Dead 2004 kind of give you a mass zombie grouped together. Or there might be another example that people will probably obviously pull out and eventually just be like, oh yeah, this too. But very rarely do you see this huge, massive CGI approach to a zombie film where it's you're not only seeing these zombies just kind of swarm a building, you're seeing them kind of creatively climb up one. And not only that, we have one movie within a zombie invasion that has to span multiple places, whether it's Korea, whether it's Israel, whether it's Nova Scotia, a number of places that have to deal with this invasion one way or the other. I just thought that this movie was very creative, and there is even at parts where it's actually strategic, which I feel is kind of refreshing. The only time that I've ever felt like there is some kind of strategic way about doing a zombie invasion was this movie in 2011 called Zombie Apocalypse, where we had Vin Rames and certain characters who were actually putting on shoulder pads and football equipment and catcher's mitts and or catcher's equipment on and stuff like that to eventually try to avoid getting bitten, avoid getting hurt by one of these zombies or scratched or something. So, very rarely, and I think that I've built up Zombie Apocalypse 2011 so much so that really a lot of people will probably go into that movie finally and just be like, man, this movie's garbage. Because eventually I want to go and re-see Zombie Apocalypse 2011, just because I think I started watching it and then I just bailed out because I had to forcibly go and watch something brand new, or I had to watch something and I kind of missed the opportunity because I had to watch something else. So World War Z. So it seems like this movie is to start off as a normal day. We have this family who's to be seemingly focused upon, which that seems honestly kind of rare, because most of the time it's kind of focused on seemingly a family at first, but then that family gets torn apart by zombie infection, and so all of a sudden it ends up being one person just running off most of the time. Of course, you see the Dawn of the Dead remake, you'll assess that. Or a lot of times it's just one individual person, Columbus in Zombieland, that is just kind of figuring out his own rules to eventually make it through this zombie invasion. It's kind of weird and interesting to see a family kind of deal with this, which, yeah. But let me know in the comments below if there was a family that eventually went through a zombie infection. That seems it seems very rare. There might be a cluster of random family members that eventually made it through one, but that doesn't count. It has to be a full-on family. So, yeah. So obviously, how I feel about this movie is to say that it's a definite, it's a great film. It feels one of a kind to me just because of the strategy that Brad Pitt is to kind of deliver in this movie, which a lot of people are just if people weren't Brad Pitt fans because they've never seen Fight Club in their life, no offense to somebody that hasn't seen that movie, it's a great film. Um, but if like I would say that like love Brad Pitt in Fight Club, but I also really enjoy Brad Pitt in this movie just because of the complexities of this movie and how Brad Pitt just kind of becomes this like, okay, you're the guy. You're gonna have to be the guy that saves the world. Uh, and there's a lot of pressure to be put together with this character. And plus, there's also just a lot of pressure to outrun zombies at every nook and cranny of this film. So, uh, so with that said, it's a great film. Like as far as scale, like it's almost like an epic kind of film, just because like this is like the biggest massive approach to zombie infection. So it's got to be almost like an epic kind of thing, even though this story people might have questions about and just be like, I don't know if this all quite works and whatever. Uh, I think that this is like a great film. It's so good. Um, like yeah, there might be some clunky stories in between, like certain setting pieces, but other than that, it's an interesting enough story. So, where can you go to eventually go out of your way to say that you can see this film? Well, you can probably go on to an app that I've been using fairly reliably called TV Crush. You can go in there and you can watch this and have really good picture quality and stuff like that. So that's why I highly recommend that. If you have a Google Play account, you could be able to go out of your way to search that app and download it and be able to watch this movie for absolutely free. Or you can go on to other apps like Fox HD Movies, or probably go on to a cluster of other apps that I've probably used over the time. But those two apps, like definitely check out TV Crush first. Uh, it'll be a good quality kind of viewing, and then go out of your way to say that you've seen this film if you haven't yet. If you haven't yet, you should. There's a whole video game that basically they did afterwards, just like heck yeah, like World War Z. Um, Supposedly they were hinting like after this movie was over to eventually have done a sequel, but it seemed that they never did for whatever reason. It seems that people are still interested in a possible sequel, but like I don't know for how much time has probably passed. It doesn't seem like there's going to eventually just push out there to be another World War Z movie, but you never know. So, with that said, let's just go into really just spoiler time so we can kind of crack this open and kind of go into it because it's basically just another zombie apocalypse film. There doesn't need to be heavily an over explanation of this film because I've technically already did some of the legwork here. Um, Really, we just have it to where like Brad Pitt's character is to be tied to the UN or the United Nations to eventually have him be the guy who is to try and figure out where exactly either patient zero had happened or really just Jerry Lane, which is Brad Pitt's character, is really to be here to find out the best weapon that he can use against these zombies, which eventually I'll go into spoilers and let you know what that is. So, let's go into it. Let's go into this zombie invasion. Let's go out of our way to say that it's about that customary time yet again. Um, I just want to make sure that there is something that I could probably slip in here before we get into spoilers. No, I think it's good enough. So let's go into it. Let's go into that double five time territory because it is about that time yet again to go in spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. Uh, I think really just my fast track way of wanting to do this spoiler is because I'm uh, starting to get a little bit of this thing called tired. So if it feels like that, I do apologize. But otherwise, let's get into this so I can get this out of the way, and then frickin' take a good old thing called sleep. So let's get into it. So we open this movie up with, of course, this family who is seemingly going through their normal day to day, waking up. So Jerry is to have a daughter with a birthday, and so Jerry is to ask his daughter. It's like, well, hey, like, what do you want for your birthday? And his daughter is to say, well, a puppy, and he's like, well, you mean a stuffed puppy? Because we could probably do that. Like we're like an actual puppy. Ooh. So all of a sudden, everybody's to have eaten breakfast, had pancakes, and just seemingly every one of these people of the family is to go off on their day. We find that Jerry had kind of quit his job to eventually be a stay at home father. We don't actually know what his wife, Karen, is to have done. But I guess it really doesn't matter because it's not going to be a thing that really is a huge concern here. So we have Jerry and the family all going and kind of like being stuck in traffic. And so all of a sudden there is to be this police motorcyclist who is to kind of clip Jerry's side mirror. And so Jerry gets out to try to grab the side mirror, and all of a sudden there's to be some other kind of driver who gets out of his car and he's like, "Hey man, do you need anything?" "Hey man, like, are things okay? Are you all right?" What a kind of overly concerned person, but I guess that's really nice. But like, but also I'm sure like whoever this person probably was is like, "Hey man, could I get another line in here? Could I get could I squeak in like something to say so I have some kind of line here?" Um, because I guess when it really comes down to it, some people probably get paid by the line. So like, and a lot of times it's either you're gonna get a spoken part or you're gonna get a part where you're just like ah, because zombie movie. So really nobody is to really know what the heck is going on. Jerry goes back into his car to eventually kind of tweak the radio station to kind of see what the heck is going on. So all of a sudden we're seeing this massive truck of sorts that is all of a sudden driving out of control, and it's basically ramming through all of these cars. And so Jerry is like, okay, this is I guess our pathway out of here, to just follow this vehicle. And so of course they do. So Jerry eventually is to try and scramble and to drive behind this huge truck of sorts. I want to say that it's a like a garbage truck, like one of those like garbage pickup truck things, but I'm not sure I'm going to be accurate about that. So Jerry and his family are to kind of crash their car, and so people are to start to get out. One of Jerry's girls is to kind of like hunker herself into this car, and so now they all kind of scramble out of this car and luckily are to find this RV. And so they end up scrambling into this RV. We end up having Jerry, who is to spot uh, like that there are certain zombies going and jumping and going after people. and one guy is to get the spotlight here because he is to get infected. And so Jerry is to consistently look back at this guy. Like, we have Jerry who consistently does these like looking back moments consistently in this film, where all of his family is to go on and get in the RV, but he's consistently looking back at this one guy, like, hey, like, I'm gonna look at this guy. Because Jerry is to try to see how long it is before a person is bitten till infection spreads and person becomes now zombie. And so Jerry is to time it out. And so now he is to eventually consistently keep trying to use this whole timing mechanism to help at some point understand if someone is going to be a zombie, even himself at some point. So this family is to all get into this RV, and so they end up driving along. All of a sudden, Jerry is to get a call from a guy named Theri Umatoni, who is to be seemingly Jerry's former employer, who is to call Jerry and say, "Hey, man, we desperately need you. Like we need you back. Like whatever. Like if we have to if we have to send a helicopter to get you, we're going to do this. Like we're going to get you. We're going to find you because yeah, like you're vital to like our survival." And so come on back. You're gonna be the next contestant on Run All Over the Dang Place because zombie invasion. So Jerry is to also notice that his daughter is seemingly having an asthma attack, and so Jerry now has to go to this convenience store, which is uh, JR Mart, to try and get an inhaler for his daughter. So now we have this like really interesting moment where Jerry is to think that all of a sudden like the world hasn't completely gone to at this point. So Jerry is to like kind of put his hands up to just be like, oh, I guess like the world's ending. Ah, well, like, I guess I'll put my pants back down again. So, and what you think that you're seeing maybe not be the right thing that you're seeing at some point. So let's get to this. So Karen is going off with one of her kids to go and scramble to get any kind of groceries that they can possibly get. Jerry is with his other daughter to try and scramble and go and find certain medications. There's to seemingly be this unsurely character that is to have a gun in his hand and is to ask Jerry, like, hey, what are you looking for? And Jerry's like, dude, all I need is just like some like asthma inhaler like thing. And so the guy's like, okay. So he ended up kind of opening up the thing, giving this guy what he needs, and he's just like, hey man, like this also helped my kid. And he's like, oh, okay, thanks. So they run off, and so all of a sudden Jerry is in kind of the distance, hearing his wife screaming for Jerry. So Jerry ends up running back to his wife to eventually start to see like that there are guys, just normal guys, not zombies, eventually just kind of grabbing at this woman and trying to like take everything from her, like taking her wallet or any number of things, I guess, to like eventually just kind of mug her. So Jerry all of a sudden was to have had this rifle that his daughter was to give him from this RV, and like we don't even have like the magazines that he duct tapes to his wrist yet, because like we don't get to that point to the apartment complex. Like man, what if he would have just like right as this thing was like popping off, he was like, dude, I gotta tape some magazines to my wrists because zombie invasion. So, uh, so Jerry goes and is to pop some shots at these guys who are going and tossing out a gun to him, basically meaning they're going to try and shoot Jerry. So these guys end up dying, and so all of a sudden this police officer just starts running in here, and Jerry's to put his hands up, just like, "Oh, I'm sorry," like like self defense, and this police officer just continues to run, just to scramble for resources, and then runs off. And so Jerry's like, "Well, okay, I guess this police officer doesn't give an F. Let's go." So they scramble out of this out of this mart, and so they end up going on, and they end up telling I think they end up recalling up Umutoni to eventually tell him that, hey, we're going to be at this apartment complex. How soon are we going to be able to get a chopper over here? Like, is it going to be within the day? And it's like, well, hey, man, you're not that important. Like, it's going to take till like the next morning. And so Jerry's like, okay, fine, we'll wait it out. So and Karen is to mention that they have some flares, so kind of like try and like spot those eventually. If the parajumpers can't find them right away, they'll have some kind of flares with them, road flares. So they're to now try and get into this building, and so Jerry is to his more like defensive measure like thing is to basically just kind of use this rifle to kind of like smack away a lot of these zombies that eventually are going to break through this door that he ends up trying to fasten to try and get all these zombies from this door, but they eventually break through. So eventually Jerry scrambles to, because he has to shoot like a couple of them, but then eventually they are to find some people that will easily let them in. Nice for them, right? So we have this kid who I believe his name is Tommy, and his mother and father. And so we have this spot where they're just kind of like talking to one another and trying to understand one another, and just like, hey, like, and so like the dad ends up giving Jerry and Karen like beers, and I'm like, I would not expect them to accept this. uh but it also seems like this family is starting to run out of food, so I'm like, yeah, they're not going to probably end up staying here very long. So we also have it to where Jerry at some point is to tell this family like, hey, like, your best bet is to probably kind of come with us, like we can probably take care of you. And this guy is like, I don't know, like I think we'll be fine here. So eventually Tommy is to kind of go with one of Jerry's kids, because evidently she was like crying in the night, so he kind of went and tried to comfort her. And Jerry is to see this kid doing that, and he's like, hey, thanks, I appreciate it. So now the very next day, when Jerry is to seemingly maybe catch a couple winks, next day is to come. So eventually now they're like, okay, like we're gonna have to like get out of this apartment, hey guys, last chance to eventually get the heck out of here. And they're like, no, we're fine. It's like, okay, well, I offered. So so they scramble. They now have to, of course, go through the same stairwell that they went to try and get up here, that was to have quite a few zombies. And so now they have to kind of fight their way up more of these steps or more of these stairs. But this time around, Jerry is to fasten his uh, rifle with a knife at the end of it. He is to, of course, duct tape magazines onto his wrists or onto his arms, his forearms, to, of course, like avoid getting bitten, or to have some kind of shield like thing to eventually kind of brace himself from getting bitten. So eventually it seems all is going well. Jerry is to just kind of like rifle these people and to like hit them with rifles and smack them and whatever. And so it seems that almost Jerry is to get close to seemingly get infected. All of a sudden, Tommy ends up coming in and is to shoot some of the zombies because he evidently has a gun on him. And so Tommy had to go and leave his apartment because the zombies, I guess, were going to break into his apartment because we can kind of see the locks buckling. So Jerry's like, okay, you're coming with me. You're coming with me if you want to live. So, uh, so Karen and the kids are to make it to the rooftop, and so Jerry almost got a little bit of blood into his mouth, and so he ends up going onto the rooftop, and he's like, well, I'm not quite sure if I'm infected or not. So Jerry is to go to the very top of this rooftop and off to the side of it to top the rooftop. That makes no sense. Jerry ends up going to the furthest side of a rooftop to kind of make the consensus of if he's going to turn, he's probably going to turn in X amount of seconds, which he doesn't. So he's like, yeah, I had a little bit of blood that went in my mouth, and I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to have turned into a zombie or not. So shouldn't you have covered up your mouth and nose anyways? Did the new normal teach you anything? I guess not. That's what I always worried about zombie invasions, whether the blood from a zombie would go into your mouth or your nose and then you would get infected. Plus, there's that whole cabin fever thing where eventually the one infected person freaking dropped into the water and then infected a number of people and turned them into eventually decaying people at some point. But yeah, so Jerry is to be fine, and so uh, this helicopter is to finally come. So luckily, good timing, right? Because eventually the door starts to buckle with zombies. Jerry's try to hold them off. The whole family is to eventually get onto this helicopter, and then eventually Jerry starts running to the helicopter. The parachuter guys or parajumper guys are to start to shoot off the zombies to try to get them all off. So this helicopter is to, of course, head to this carrier that is to seemingly be holding as many people as they can possibly carry. Uh, so Jerry's family is to be put into this one uh, kind of place where they are to just kind of be held up until eventually Jerry is to no longer have usefulness for these people, which is going to seem very soon. Because Jerry's to go off and talk to Umatone uh, and kind of get an update because we have Jerry who's starting to talk to him, but then Karen is just like, how about you just kind of go off and how about you just like you not tell us like how the world is falling apart? So they both end up going off, and so Umatame is to mention to Jerry that the president is dead, and that really Jerry is to ask like, okay, like who's like, where's the safest like country, like who's kind of beating this out better than anyone else is. And so eventually they're to eventually get updates. And so Umatame is to kind of mention that there were certain places that were to have gotten certain things ahead of time. They were to have an email or a memo being sent out with the word zombie in it. And I guess supposedly that was happening in Jerusalem, I believe. Not quite sure. Not going to confirm that. And so uh, eventually there's to be these UN kind of delegates that are to go on and just be talking about like what their plan is, what their plan of attack is. And we seemingly have this guy who's Andrew Fastback, who is to supposedly be these people's hope. And he's like 20 some odd, 23, somewhere around there, 23, 26. What I say, 23? Let's say that, because it's I probably said one of those numbers correctly. So this guy is to be so young, but he is to be seemingly the smartest guy in the room. So like, okay, we're gonna put all our chips into this guy. Hopefully, hopefully that's not a huge mistake. So, uh, so all of a sudden, Jerry is to eventually go and talk to this naval commander. And so this naval commander is wanting to get Jerry, like, hey, we're going to have you basically be suiting up right away to eventually have you take this Andrew character to eventually go uh, to uh, to Korea to kind of figure this thing out. Uh, and so, like, get ready because you're going to go out there. And Jerry's like, no, I'm not. Like, no, you're not going to have me, like, be suiting up anytime soon. I'm not going to leave my family. And the naval commander is like, well, if you do not go and do this mission, your family is going to go somewhere else as well as you will because you will no longer have any usefulness. Like, go away. Like, if you're not going to do this, you're going to go away. And probably to a much less safer place than where this is. So Jerry's like, okay, fine. Well, I will go and do this mission. I will risk my life if it means that my family will be here a little bit longer. So Jerry goes and talks to Karen and says, like, hey, I'm going to have to skedaddle. I'm going to have to go to Korea. We're going to have to figure these things out. And so Karen is like, no, like, don't leave this. And Jerry's like, I get that. I've already thought of that, but I have to go. Like, if I don't go, we go out of this ship. So like basically we've already been threatened about this. So I have to go, and Karen's like, okay. So Jerry is to give Karen a satellite phone to basically just tell her like, hey, like just I'm gonna call you once a day. Hopefully we'll kind of keep this conversation going, but hopefully this satellite phone doesn't run out of batteries, right? So so Jerry is to go off with this Andrew character, the prodigy of whatever. So Jerry is to go off with this guy onto this plane, and there's to seemingly be some military force that is to be tied with them. And so they're on this plane flying to Korea now. So we have this kind of fun little banter where Jerry is to mention how the kind of the military force is with them, that they're just kind of hammers, and when ever these guys are to kind of see anyone else, they just kind of see them as nails. And so it's like so Jerry is kind of telling Andrew, it's hey man, like eventually you might be shot, so just like try to avoid that, because even these guys might shoot you, because they're looking at you just maybe I should shoot this guy. And the kind of the hammer guys are we heard that. Yeah, I bet you did. So, uh, so Andrew is to go on and kind of showcase to us how smart he is. He is to talk about like Mother Nature and viruses and all this like weird like kind of thing, where eventually he is to uh, try to take Mother Nature and figure her out like a puzzle, uh, because of her strengths and her weaknesses and this and that. And you have this all rigmarole of what this guy is saying, which is to really just have Andrew say that, yeah, I'm going to try to outsmart this B word. Or, yeah, Andrew? Yeah. Yeah. So Andrew is to say, yeah, I'm going to do this. Yeah, like, we're going to crack this thing wide open. Speaking of cracking wide open, immediately when they are to open the plane to get these guys from point A, which is plane, to point B, which is to be this hideout, or this military base with all these soldiers in it, to have a guy named Captain Speak in it. Immediately as this Andrew is to kind of start walking out here, all of a sudden Andrew is to walk back into the plane because he ends up getting scared, because zombies are starting to pop off and guys are starting to shoot and whatever. And all of a sudden Andrew is to accidentally go and shoot himself. And so eventually they go into the base, and so oh, so you're like prodigal son or whatever, he's dead. Wow. Hopefully you have another great hope on your hands, because Butterfingers, right? So Jerry is to just be like, well, hey, if anything, like, you still got me, so we're still gonna try and figure this freaking out. So Captain Speak is to eventually lead uh, Jerry to the supposed case of where their patient zero technically was. And because Jerry is to mention to Captain Speaks to ask him, it's hey, did you guys also get the memo about the document that ended up saying zombie in it? And the guy's well, I didn't get a memo. I got some email saying something about a zombie, but I didn't think anything of it until now, I guess. So Captain Speaks is to take Jerry and explain the whole patient zero of things. So it seems that we had uh, some doctor who is taking care of this patient, and all of a sudden this doctor is to eventually find out that this patient was to turn into a zombie, and it seems like this guy had taken 10 minutes to have turned into being a zombie. And so Jerry's well, that seems weird. I had seen a zombie firsthand that changed way quicker than that. So eventually Jerry is to talk to this one soldier, and it seems that this one soldier had this limp. And so Jerry's well, hey, why isn't that you, because this guy was like in the middle of the firefight, and the zombie didn't go after this guy, and so Jerry's like, okay, like why weren't you like going and being like attacked by this thing? And Jerry's like, or in the one soldier is to say, it's like, well, I guess I was just lucky. It's like, I don't know, because supposedly the guy had a limp well before like this whole moment when he was attacked, because Jerry's to spot this guy having this limp, and so it's like, okay, something about that sticks out. So Jerry is to go on and talk to this CIA agent, who is to be just called ex-CIA agent. Wow, they didn't really give him much of a created name now, did they? And so Jerry's to talk to this guy, and he is to mention how there seems to be certain kind of places that weirdly had some kind of quick resources to have heard about this whole zombie infection, and they planned ahead. And so Jerry's like, wait a minute, what? And this ex-CIA agent is like, well, yeah, like, they got to a point where they, in one place, went ahead and pulled all the teeth out of every single person to, if someone was to eventually have turned, then, like, no one would have been bitten because no teeth. And so it's like, okay, that's a interesting strategy. To where this guy ends up pulling his own teeth out and just spitting into the sink. So this CIA agent is to eventually mention how like Israel had like built this wall, and so Jerry's like, well, like Israel is known for like building walls anyways. Like there's several kind of places over there that are eventually just like look at Berlin and the Berlin Wall, and like everybody at some point had built a wall at some point. Like look at the Great Wall of China and so on and so forth. Like there's just a lot of walls everywhere. But eventually this CIA agent, it's like, well, it seems like they tried to like figure out a way to have like come up with a wall that would kind of really seal the deal, so to speak. So now Jerry had now talked to the CIA agent, because basically uh, all the area of Patient Zero is basically now like dust and just like a distant memory of what it really was. So Jerry's like, well, I guess we're having to force them to go now to Israel, because we need to figure out if they had a Patient Zero there. So Jerry is to go off to Israel to and like we have this one moment where they have to go and take these bikes and have these guys kind of bike to this plane. And so we also have to refuel this plane. And so Captain Speaks is to have to go and get the truck to kind of gas this plane. And so the guys end up kind of bashing into this kind of one barbed wire, and all of a sudden also Jerry is to have his phone go off, and so they're like, oh crap. So now they have to kind of run and scramble to the plane. Captain Speaks is to basically try and have to do the best he can to eventually kind of give these guys a wide berth kind of thing. So eventually Captain Speaks is to eventually get infected, and so he's like, ah, crap. And so eventually one of the soldiers is just like, hey man, I know you're gonna get infected, like do you want me to kind of do this for you? And no, and Captain Speaks is like, no, I'm gonna do it myself. Pa! The guy shoots himself in his own head, sadly enough. We also had the one moment where eventually the one guy is to have to scramble and undo the gasoline pump. Uh, but he was almost going to go into the plane with the guys, but instead, like, it's like, well, I hope Israel is going to work out because I'm going to freaking die here. So these guys go off to Israel, and it seems that everything is hunky dory because walls are up. So it seems for a good while that it seems that Israel seems to have some kind of protection going. It seems like for a while. So Jerry is to, of course, go on to meet uh, Warmbrum, and so Warmbrum is to go on and talk to Jerry, and so Jerry is to really just ask this guy about, like, well, hey, like, where really was the patient zero? Like, you guys um, had this document uh, about zombies, but it seems like you guys were the, like, as the same as anyone else, but it seems like you were the only ones that decided upon, like, doing something about it. And so that's because this guy was to say, it's like, well, that's because we have a certain kind of way of doing things where we have this kind of 10-man kind of thing where if 9 people were to go and say that there isn't going to be a zombie infection and why should we eventually uh like do anything about this, the 10th man is to come in and is to eventually say, well, maybe there is a zombie infection, maybe we should do something about it. And then he has to go and convince all the other 9 people that they should go and do something for precautionary measures, and so they did. So because eventually it seemed that Jurgen was to, like, seemingly get reports about things, and to, like, it seems like these things were to be factual, and so they decided to go and create this whole wall barrier like thing. And so it seemingly had been working out so well that they decided to start bringing in like kind of like refugees or just kind of just people, because it seemed like a safe bet to start bringing normal people in. So, of course, because whoever's not infected, the civilians and whatever just kind of keep them safe. And plus, this wall had been working out really good. So, but eventually, Jerry is to try and ask Warmbrum about Patient Zero because, like, Jerry is to mention that it's too late to build this, like, these big massive walls where he is to be from. Like, you can't do that now. Like, we have to just kind of figure out how to either cure this, or we have to figure out how to do this another way besides creating walls. We can't do that. Like, we just don't have the capability. And so Warmbrum is to basically tell Jerry, it's like, well, hey, like, I don't think there really is a patient zero. Like, every time we are to have gotten that we thought that we could have possibly had the patient zero, like, it just kind of seemed like there were other cases somewhere else. So, like, there's no way that you can figure this out. There's no way that you can backtrack this, and patient zero is probably not even still alive by this point. So, like, basically, like, you have to come up with a plan B. So Jerry is to eventually kind of go with Warmbrum to just kind of check more things out in Israel, to all of a sudden see that these people are all singing because evidently they're happy to seemingly be saved, and so I guess they are to be going on and singing maybe some religious songs or something like that. All of a sudden, one girl is to grab the mic, so we're like, yeah, yeah, we're feeling good because we're in Israel and whatever. Yeah, shout out to my to the Z's and the undead and yeah. Yeah. Tupac, O Town. so, uh, so yeah, so these people are all of a sudden singing, and like we end up having these helicopters that are circling around this wall, and we start to see these huge, massive swarms of zombies that are starting to get closer and closer to this wall. And I'm like, why didn't these helicopters stop these zombies from starting to stack up against this wall? Like, were the helicopters just lazy? Could they have not to have gotten to this quick enough or fast enough? But so Jerry all of a sudden is to start to notice that there's a possibility that these people are getting far too loud with their singing and whichever, which isn't that a pain in the buttokus where you just have people that are just like singing or doing their music or some kind of something far too loud all the time? Isn't that a pain? In case you have neighbors. Anyways, so pushing on. It's a joke. So eventually we have these zombies that are stacking up against this wall as if all these zombies are to be ladders to help the other zombies make their way up here. So all of a sudden, Jerry's to start to spot that these zombies are to make it over the wall because they're to ladder their way up here. So now we have the military force in Israel desperately trying to shoot out all these zombies that are basically crashing up against these vehicles to try and make their way further through this military force. And so now it's really just Jerry's opportunity to freaking scramble out of here to eventually try and make it to uh, get back to his plane that is going to leave off without him, because his plane is just like, dude, I'm only caring about my life. I'm gonna be flying out wherever the heck. So Jerry is to go with this girl named Segan and just kind of scramble through Israel and eventually try and make her way or make their way back to this airport to find the next plane to get the heck out of here, because Israel is no longer a safe place. So, uh, so while Jerry is to consistently run through Israel, he is to start to spot these unique like things. There is to be this one old man who is to just be kind of walking in through the zombies, and none of the zombies are wanting any of that. They don't want a piece of that old man, and so Jerry's like looking back like, hey, what's up with that old man? Jerry's to run through Israel further to eventually find some uh, balding kid who is to seemingly be able to have just uh, kind of given up and just decides to just go and sit into the middle of this road, and the zombies just run around him and don't even bother going to try and attack him whatsoever. And Jerry's like, hey, what's that? What's up with that? What's going on? You would have thought Jerry by somewhere part of this episode or part of this movie, Jerry would get like a freaking crick in his neck for how many double and triple and quadruple takes that he's going and trying to like see all these people and see what's going on with them and like see why these cases are so unique. So Jerry goes on with Segan, and so Segan and all these great Israel forces are trying to bash through all these zombies, and so we find out that Segan is to eventually get a bite on the arm, and so Jerry, without thinking, just chops her freaking hand off, and so now he's there to try to quickly fasten some kind of uh, like thing to kind of stop this bleeding, And so Jerry is to just kind of like 1,000, two, like try to count it out. And Segan doesn't turn, so he's like, aha. Like, so if somebody bites you on the arm or the leg or whatever, chop it off. And it seems like we have a deterrent against a zombie infection. But Segan was to eventually ask Jerry, it's like, hey, like, how did you know that that was going to work? And Jerry's like, I didn't. It was just a quick assumption, and luckily it panned out. So, because Segan and Jerry are to eventually make it to the airport and are to just stop this one random plane and just be like, hey man, like we have guns, like frickin' stop. So they end up going on into this plane that was going to stop at Israel, but I guess they're like, well, I guess not. So Jerry is to tell these guys frickin' take off, let's get frickin' out of here. Like, and so they're like, all right. So they, I guess, didn't need to get refueled, so they just end up heading off. And so uh, what ends up happening is that uh, they're like kind of scrambling to figure out where is the next location to eventually head. So uh, so eventually Jerry is to go and bandage uh, Sagen's wound and kind of give her this alcohol. And so eventually Jerry is to ask uh, Utoni or Umatome to, because he's gonna call him and say like, hey, we need some kind of facility like that's gonna be the closest that this plane can get us that has a ton of vaccines, because Jerry has figured something out, but he's not quite sure it's even going to work. So eventually, Jerry is to give this phone to the pilot, and so evidently they had figured it out that the closest place that they can possibly land is this one facility that is to be called Who Research Facility. They're going to land close as they can to that spot. And so Jerry's like, well, do you guys think you have enough like gas for that? And the guy's like, I think we do. Like, I think we can have a pretty good shot that we're going to make it there. So he's like, okay, great. So now I think Jerry's supposedly satellite phone is to be dead. Uh, I think in between plane spots, I think when he is to make his way to Israel, uh, Jerry is to eventually call Karen and just be like, hey, like, yeah, Korea didn't work out, so we're going to Israel now. And so Karen is like, yeah, I called you. And he's like, yeah, crappy timing. Because Jerry tried to call her, but he called her in the place where, like, the satellite phone doesn't work all that well. And so he just got static. Karen tried to call him back. And that's when he was basically doing a mission while they was going off. So, uh, so what ends up happening is all of a sudden we have this stewardess who is to go back in the far back of this plane and open up this one part of this plane to eventually find out that there, I guess, had been a zombie that had found its way onto this plane and had grabbed onto her and had bit her. And so now all of a sudden we end up having the back of the plane that is starting to slowly but surely start to be infected with zombies. And so everyone's master plan that's kind of on the front part of the plane is to just go on and start stacking all their luggage against where this door is to eventually just try to hold off these zombies until they can land. So eventually the zombies are to break through that, and so eventually now they have to forcibly go into desperate measures, and so eventually they have to go and create a big massive hole into this plane to just uh, shoot all of the zombies out of the plane. And so both uh, both Jerry and Segan are Segan, yeah, Segan, ill pronouncing, I'm sure. Uh, they end up kind of like seat buckling in, and so yeah, the pilots are like, dude, we're gonna have to do an emergency landing. This sucks, but we're gonna have to do it. So they end up crashing the plane, and I think only Segan and Jerry survive out of this whole thing. What miraculous luck, right? But Jerry is to seemingly have a freaking metal like piece into his frick, and so he is to maybe think about pulling it out, but he's like, dude, if I probably pull this out, I'm gonna probably bleed out. So Jerry leaves it in, and so Jerry is to find Segan, and so they end up just like their only thing to really just do at this point now is to eventually just walk their way to the WHO research facility. I say WHO because it's spelled WHO, like there's periods in between those letters. So, funny enough, we end up having one guy who is to be one of the WHO doctors, who is to actually be Doctor Who, which I thought that was kind of funny. So, like, hey, Doctor Who, Who Doctor, isn't that funny? So they walk to this facility, and so eventually Jerry is to go and uh, I guess pass out by this facility, and so when he wakes, evidently he had been like sleeping for 3 days, and so Umatone uh, ends up taking Jerry's family and taking them to Nova Scotia because they just naturally assumed that Jerry was dead. And so, like, their mission is basically like to just have this family just like, okay, well, your husband no longer is to be needed, so you're no longer to be needed on this boat. So Jerry eventually goes and is to wake up and see these WHO doctors, and so he is to start talking to them, and they are to start asking him questions about like, okay, who are you? What are you doing here? Why do you have this phone? So on and so forth. And so Jerry's like, hey, like, call the number that's on the phone, and they'll tell you who I am. They'll tell you why I'm here. So this WHO doctor is to eventually call this number, and so it's to be Umatone that is to answer. And so Jerry's like, why, Umatome? Why didn't Karen answer this phone? And the guy was like, yeah, about that. And he's like, what? So he finds out that his whole entire family is in North Scotia, and he's like, oh crap. Like, that means my family is in risk of possibly dying because that place, in my mind, doesn't seem all that safe. So Jerry's kind of ticked, but there's nothing he can do. So Jerry had been sewn up and had slept for 3 days. So really, they're just like, oh man, Jerry's still alive. So I guess there is still a plan in place. great, let's see if this whole thing works out. So now their master plan is that they have to go and make it to this one spot within this facility that isn't completely overrun by zombies, and try and get to all the deadly vaccine virus like things. So, and hope that this actually does work. Because Jerry is to talk to is to scramble and talk with the Who doctors, because that's all they're called in IMDb. They don't have actual names here. So these doctors are just like, well, like maybe we might need specific kind of illnesses or whatever, but like it has to be the most like deadly illness, but it's something that you could actually cure. And so it's like, okay, so they have to kind of figure that out. And so they kind of scramble to eventually tell Jerry where the specific places that he has to go to find these things. And so him and two other people, Segan and one of the doctors, are to go to this location and eventually kind of do it quietly, because there seems to be like a scatter of zombies at some point. So it's like, hey, like whatever you do, like try to avoid shooting them. Just try to like really just stealthily get through these spots, and then you should be golden. So they end up going, and the doctor ends up telling the one other doctor, like, hey man, like if all these zombies make it back here before we do, just seal this thing off permanently. So they go off, and so immediately we have Brad, who ends up smacking and rolling this like this Mountain Dew, and I'm like, was there any kind of sponsor in this movie? Any kind of soda sponsor? Because we also have Brad at one point who went drinking this Pepsi, and he's like, like choice of a new generation. Like it's like, yeah, that sweet, delicious Pepsi. Like he's going and taking like this Pepsi like vending machine thing. And I'm kind of wondering if that might have been a sponsor at some point, because like if it wasn't some kind of sponsor, then more than likely there would have been not a need for Brad to just kind of just stop and just be like, yeah, just so good. Like he's just like taking a breather because he's like, hey man, I'm probably gonna die anyway, so let me just chug down a Pepsi, and just like, choice of the new generation. So so uh we push along, and so we end up having seemingly these characters stealthily trying to make it through this to get to the one chamber room place that has this locked door. And so we have this one door that kind of, and so Brad Pitt has to just kind of like squeak it a little bit more, you're gonna die. And like Brad ends up putting this axe there so like the door doesn't squeak back open again. So they make it through this door, and it seems like everything is going well up until finally there's be this one spot where like they're so freaking close, but they end up making one crackle of a sound. And so then Segan has to go and shoot one of the zombies, which all of a sudden creates them to have both this doctor and Siegel to be scrambling the heck out of there, to now have Jerry, who is to be scrambling in another direction, where he is to eventually go and kill one of these zombies, and all of a sudden he ends up spotting that there's another zombie. And so like Jerry luckily has this crowbar quasi in one head of a zombie and pulls it out, and then goes and attacks this other one. So Now, Jerry seems to be the only one that is to have gotten to the place that he needs to get to these vaccines or these illnesses. And I'm also kind of wondering at this point if there's any part of this movie that isn't as accurate as it is for the book, because I believe that this was taken or adapted from off of a book. Um, and plus also went on to like be a video game, and I've kind of seen footage of the video game, but eventually I think after this movie it's just kind of tempting to eventually kind of go through any number of playthroughs and stuff like that to have just kind of gone through this, because I think I ended up seeing Lord Minion 77's playthrough of this, and of course I've also seen Markiplier recently kind of thumbing through World War Z a little bit, just kind of get to certain missions where there's just a ton of zombies, because like that's basically all he says. Like that's the title of the video, and that's what Markiplier says throughout the whole entire video. Like, I play World War Z so that way I can kill a ton of zombies, and so on and so forth. So that's the only real memorizing thing of which that I do when someone is to repeat things 85 times in one video. And I'm like, yeah. No offense to Markiplier. Like, I don't know how many times that I would probably watch a Markiplier video and he's just like, fuck. Like, especially when like you would get probably like a Mario Maker episode where eventually he is to every time he is to curse, he is to basically donate money, and you end up seeing how many numerous times that he has cussed throughout one video. And he's like, "Oh, well, how much money am I gonna have to supposedly donate to uh, a charity? Oh, that much? Oh, well, that sucks." So, uh, my eye is just twitching a little bit because freaking I guess I don't get enough sleep, so it freaking twitches for whatever reason. So that's great. But if anyways, I'm kind of wrapping this up anyways. So Brad makes it to this spot, and so Brad starts going on and is to just kind of grab a bunch of stuff because he doesn't know. Like the doctors weren't to tell him like take this exact thing when you're to make it there. Wouldn't you have thought that they would have probably told, like, wrote it on somebody's arm, like, on every single one of these people's arms, like, where, like, what they should have grabbed, like, so that way, if any number of them were to die, then they would have at least had someone there that had a list of what they needed to get. But, no, 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 like, not with these people. So, these doctors these doctors are to look on at Jerry going and kind of thumbing through all this stuff, and they're like, oh my god, if this guy goes and takes any number of the stuff that he just grabbed, he's definitely gonna die. So Jerry is to just be like, well, like, I gotta do something. So this guy ends up going to this room that has this locked combination, which eventually he gets the combination for. So he ends up going to this room, leaving this weapon off to the side. And so Jerry starts scrambling and getting any kind of a concoction of things that he eventually will need to help these people. So then all of a sudden we have this zombie who smacks into the door, and so they're like, oh crap, like, oh no, like this guy's gonna have to like figure out like what thing he's going to need to kind of make it through this zombie, because he can't just open the door and hope that this zombie is not going to attack him. Or so Jerry goes and is to go and inject him with one of these illnesses, and he ends up writing a letter, and so that way the doctors can read it. And he says, "Tell my family I love them." So Jerry goes and injects himself, and then is to kind of wait a while. And so he's like, "Okay, it's either now or never." So Jerry opens the door, the zombie comes in, and the zombie is to take a whiff of Jerry, and then Jerry is to just kind of like seemingly move past him and close his door behind him. And so now Jerry is just like, yeah. So he ends up like starting to just walk off. Is like da 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 da, like trotting and whatever. Is like, yeah, I did it. Like, yeah, like it works. I was right about this. So Jerry is just trotting along, and so now the real test is for him to, after he is to drink his Pepsi and take a little break, his victory lap. So Jerry's to now have all these Pepsi cans just kind of crackling out of this vending machine to all of a sudden alert all the zombies where they're like, hey. So all the zombies are running through Jerry, and he's just like, well, like they're not attacking me. Great. So eventually he goes to the door, the doctors open it, and so basically they figured it out. They've technically beaten this thing. So now Jerry is to get some kind of whatever thing he is to have had. I guess they supposedly gave him a shot and possibly cured it. Not quite sure. So that's what we were kind of assuming if they were to have ever made a World War Z sequel. Would Brad Pitt be in the sequel movie? Would he have been a character that died? Because deadly diseases and deadly illnesses and like they need a cure for them. So now they kind of spread the word that they have figured out how to beat these zombies. And so now we just see that there's to be a ton of people kind of finally fighting back. And now we start to have Brad Pitt kind of chiming in with all these kind of random footages of people trying to go after these zombies, and now having the ability to just be right in front of them and basically kill them off because they are to seemingly be with these illnesses that they can cure. So eventually they're just kind of going and going through these zombies and shooting them off and killing them all off. And it seems that now they're having this ability to easily be able to wipe these things out. And to where there's like a whole stadium just full of zombies where they end up kind of like taking them all out. And so they're winning now. And so they're like, hey man, like we got our world back. So basically the way this kind of is to like send it off is to have Brad make it back to North Scotia with his family. And so like basically it's just like, hey, like we did it, like we won. And so like that's the send off of the movie. So with that said, I'm going to send myself off to get some rest. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye everybody. Bye everybody. Really enjoy this film. If you got this far, thank you for watching this long. But with that said, I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.